Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live Studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, well, as is our usual want, all politics, but tonight, a two-part show. First up, he was one time the city council president, a mayoral aspirant, and of course he's now a successful attorney, as well as now an author. And tonight in the first half, we'll talk with Larry DiCara, the pundit extraordinaire, and of course the author of a new book. It's called Turmoil and Transition in Boston, a political memoir of the busing era. Then in the second half, we'll kick off our coverage of election 2014. First of our mayoral candidate interviews, Joe Avellone, successful businessman from Wellesley, one of 5 Democrats in the hunt for the Democratic nomination for governor. All that and more tonight on Talk to the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, a two-part show, and in this first part, we'll look back on some of Boston's political history, and who better than a man who lived it and now has written about it as well. The book is called Turmoil and Transition in Boston. Joining me, a man who, well, many people thought should have been mayor, but didn't come to be yet. His memoir about life during the 70s, 80s, especially in Boston, and of course, what happened during that era is perhaps one of the best political books I've read in quite some time, and I'm pleased to have joining me the author. He's a successful attorney, man you often see in quotes in all the major dailies and amongst the television channels, attorney Larry DiCara. And Larry, nice to have you here.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. Of course, I want to mainly talk about the book, but I've got to ask you a few questions first about this mayoral election, which, you know, in many ways had some parallels with past campaigns.
Well, the great parallel to '83 was it's such a large field, very difficult for a candidate to differentiate him or herself. And Marty Walsh obviously had a core constituency, and he built upon it. His securing the endorsements of Charlotte Golar-Ritchie and of John Barros, Felix Arroyo, were significant steps in consolidating his support. And for the first time in my adult life, Boston did not vote according to race, but according to geography and economic class. Well, and that's a big change.
You know, some people, well, I don't think anybody should be surprised at the result. You know what organization can mean to a campaign firsthand, and certainly I think Marty Walsh should be the most organized.
He had 5,000 people on the ground on election day. He won by slightly under 5,000 votes. I think any poll worker, any campaign worker can get one person.
Yeah. Well, and of course, a smashing victory as it turned out. Although, after the preliminary, it looked like it was John Connolly's race to win.
There were some early polls.
Did he give it away? Did he lose it?
I think those polls were factually incorrect. We did an article in Commonwealth magazine. James Sutherland is my co-author. He's a much better statistician than I am and much smarter.
I doubt it.
And
go ahead.
The polling data that some of those early polls used suggested that 30% of the vote would come out of Allston and Brighton and the downtown neighborhoods. And that's a presidential year, but not a mayoral year. And if those pollsters who get paid lots of money had read some of my articles, they would have known there was a bifurcated electorate in the city.
But for a long time, it wasn't clear how this race would kind of turn. When did it turn in your mind? And I mean, when was the key turning point?
I think those 3 endorsements, when Marty walked down the street, I think outside the First Parish Church, around the corner from Charlotte Golar-Ritchie's house, not only did it give him an impetus in the minority community, it also gave a lot of folks in JP, where I live, and other neighborhoods, something to think about. And he came much closer in Jamaica Plain than I think either he or John Conley expected, and those endorsements helped.
Well, at the end, again, Larry DiCara tonight talking about his book, Turmoil and Transition in Boston, political memoir of the busing era. In some ways, and we'll connect the two, this is the how Marty Walsh won, and here's a guy, a Dorchester guy, as you were. In some ways,
a single Dorchester guy, I was.
The same scenario as Larry DiCara running for mayor in 1983, and of course your book covers a period of time, including your run for mayor in 1983, but the same kind of scenario where Larry DiCara could have won.
Well, it was a very different city. Believe it or not, Joe, difficult though it is for anyone to understand, there were intelligent people who 30 years ago suggested an Italian could never be elected mayor of Boston, as if the skies would fall if that happened. And there were many people who said a single person could never be elected mayor of Boston. So we have gone from 20 years of a mayor who was definitely Italian to a mayor who was currently single, and also a person in recovery. And that shows how the city has grown and how politics has changed and how Marty was able to relate to families across the city because of his life story.
Well, it wasn't always so pleasant, and I'm thinking of it, and I'm pulling just parts of it out. And again, if you haven't read the book, pick it up. It's some of the best Boston political history I've read since I'm here, and this guy here knows more than in his little finger than I got in 18 years of doing this show. But take us back to that time, because it was a very troubled time.
We had the deseg order came down in June of 1974. And Boston at that time was a city in decline. We had unemployment probably around 20%. Unemployment among young males, who tend to be the people who make the most trouble in society, was probably 25%. And in some neighborhoods, it may have been 30%. It was not a good situation. People had come back from Vietnam, but there weren't jobs for them. There were a lot of problems with drugs and other issues as well. But it was mostly an economic problem, and that fueled enormous anger in the city and resulted in black people and white people taking to the streets, both in opposition to and in support of the court order. And a whole bunch of children, arguably a generation of children, was lost as a result. Many children dropped out of school, and it was ugly. It got so ugly that Ted Landsmark was assaulted by the flag.
Everybody remembers that
in
photo.
The spring of 1976. I remember being at City Hall and sitting with my colleagues in just amazement at that having happened. And there was also a white gentleman was assaulted for random reasons. You know, we have violence in our city, and every city has some violence, but most of our violence is between and among people who know each other. It's random violence that gets very, very scary. And a number of things happened in the course of a few years. First of all, we had the March Against Violence. And I remember marching at the front of the line with Kevin White, Senator Brooke, a gentleman of color, and Cardinal Medeiros, and I was right behind him in the second row. And somehow or other, most of my colleagues in public office, white people who'd been elected citywide, as I had been, did not march in the March Against Violence because they were scared of the negative reaction from the anti-busing movement. Second, the Queen came, and nothing bad happened. Third, we opened Quincy Market. And fourth, Jimmy Carter got elected. Now that in and of itself was not that great. Carter was, with all due respect to the good people of Georgia, not a great president. But Carter in the White House and Tip O'Neill as Speaker of the House meant the federal dollars began flowing. So Boston was able to get money to fix up the Charlestown Navy Yard, Copley Place, Lafayette Place, and we got construction jobs and people were working. And all this happened in 3 or 4 years.
But a lot of that got lost, and again, for those of you who might just be joining us, the book is called Turmoil and Transition in Boston. Joining me, the author, Larry DiCara, well known. A lot of people just as soon forget that era, wouldn't they?
Well, some might.
What's been the reaction to your book?
But really, most people read the book and they say, I remember that. I never thought of it that way. Maybe we should have thought of things differently. I talk at great length about the competing plans before Judge Garrity and how, in my opinion, he picked the wrong one. He picked a plan which did not understand the city, and the plan which Eddie McCormick, who understood the city, had drafted would have been far superior. So there's a lot of discussion there. And maybe the book opens a few wounds and also will probably open a few eyes. And that's the real goal.
Well,
and the other thing that happened in the city is we lost arguably almost 10% of our population in a handful of years. A combination, mass exodus because of the school desegregation order, because of rampant unemployment, because of bad housing conditions, arson rings, you name it, we had it. New York City defaulted, a whole bunch of bad things happened. And what happened, Joe, is that people moved into the city, into Dorchester, where I lived, into JP, where I live now, into Rosendale, into many neighborhoods, Mission Hill. And they were people who wanted to live in the city. They weren't scared about the person living next door not looking like them. They didn't really get bothered if they saw a multiracial couple or a same-sex couple walking down the street. And to some extent, these folks repopulated the city. And that was the beginning of our economic...
turning point.
Absolutely. It's the beginning of our economic resurgence. So one could make the case that had we not emptied the city out, we would not have repopulated it as quickly as we did.
Well, I found your particularly telling interesting comment, because that wasn't always so clear back then. And forgive me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but you said it put you in a very difficult situation growing up in Dorchester, white Irish, largely Irish Dorchester, but a nice little old boy, and progressive politics. But you said I was no profile in courage.
No, I mean, I think a whole bunch of us maybe could have acted differently. And I say that in the book, and I've thought about it for about 40 years, so it's a good long time to think.
Well, yet I would say it took some courage, because you also said that ultimately that you don't think that busing, or at least that path chosen by Judge Garrity, was a success. And
I'm a results guy,
the political correctness would say you shouldn't say that, so that shows some courage there.
I'm a results guy, and the truth is that we have children in schools in this city today who are doing no better than they were 40 years ago before the court order. And children suffer as a result of, my opinion, excess bureaucracy and insufficient incentives to excel.
Kind of an unwillingness to change because of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the most recent story in one of the Boston papers suggested that the John Marshall School, where nearly every child was not proficient in English and math, had teacher ratings where every teacher got excellent on nearly every time they were rated. That doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense at Nixon Peabody. It wouldn't make any sense at BNN. It wouldn't make any sense at the drugstore across the street. And we have to have different incentives to have children learn. I think that, going back to some of the tough decisions that I made, in 75...
Would you do anything different, incidentally?
Very little. Yep. In 75, Mrs. Hicks, she sat next to me that year.
Yep. Louise Day Hicks.
We sit alphabetically.
Yep.
And she basically said, you've been a good colleague. I just want to warn you that the anti-busing movement is going to try to get you out. And they're going to do everything they can to defeat you, because you've been the only city councilor who has not gone to the ROAR meetings.
Not because you were championing.
No, just because I had not genuflected at the altar of resistance. And I said, Louise, I'm doing what I think is right. And she says, I respect you for that, but I just want to warn you. And sure enough, the day before the election in 1975, there's a full-page ad, back of the first section of the Globe, probably as good a place to put an ad, and they endorsed 8 incumbents and John Kerrigan. They didn't endorse me. And I squeaked by. I squeaked by because my numbers in the downtown neighborhoods, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, South End, increased, because I held most of the Italians, and because my numbers in the black community, as a result of Mrs. Cass and Reverend Haynes and other people, went up.
Now, that didn't cow you, though? after that election. I mean,
I'm still the same
and of
Larry.
course,
Yeah. And speaking of profiles in courage, I think one of the ones that we'll talk about in the future is Tom Menino's refusal to march in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. That, when he first said it, almost 20 years ago, was extraordinary.
Yes, it was.
And I give Tom Menino credit for that, beyond what anybody could have imagined. And what he was saying is, if this parade is for all the people of the city, then it should be for all the people of the city. And a small group of folks sitting around in South Boston shouldn't decide to exclude gay people, even if they're from South Boston, even if they're veterans.
Now, of course, Tom Menino, he scored well wherever he ran, but he wasn't dependent upon South Boston. And I'm not sure Marty Walsh is either, but he did very well over there.
But Marty, John Conley, all the major candidates for mayor said the exact same thing. They can be a parade, I'm not going to march in it.
And it's the same. But now, let's go back. Let's bring us to the modern era. Because there's lots of change on the horizon after 20 years of Tom Menino, and he certainly had his own style and major accomplishments. I think the city has improved remarkably, and I don't think anybody would argue with that. But all the polls also show that people were really ready for change. Now, what about this guy, Marty Walsh? Is he up to the task?
Absolutely. It's a very different... I just saw him Saturday night at the Bar Association dinner. He is assembling a good team. It is very different from being in the legislature. And as thick as the briefing books may be, there's no book on how to be mayor. He's assembling a team diligently, bringing aboard some quality people. I think he'll probably put together some legislative packages to try to do things differently. I think he's off to a decent start. He's working very hard, and he's a very decent young man.
Well, I keep thinking, how would have, especially after reading your book, how would have this city been different if Larry DiCara had been mayor?
Well, Larry Harmon at the Globe wrote an article saying that we would have gotten where we wanted to go faster. And, I've been a young man in a hurry for a long time, yes, and maybe we would have, but this is a much better city than it was when I was growing up, a much better city than it was when I was in public office, and I give Kevin White enormous credit for taking some great leaps of faith, Quincy Market being at the top of the list.
And you were involved in that as well.
Absolutely. It was a tough vote, 6-3 vote. And I give Tom Menino a lot of credit for standing up to special interests that nobody would have thought of standing up to a generation ago.
Well, and we shall see what happens with the new administration. But if you're a fan of Boston politics, political history, this is the book to read. Again, it's called Turmoil and Transition in Boston, a political memoir from the busing era. Where can they get a copy of this,
Larry? They can get it on Amazon.
Yeah.
They can get it at the Harvard Coop, and there's other bookstores also have it. It's in many libraries as well.
Well, it's a great reading, especially if you love politics like I do, and couldn't put the book down. Larry DiCara, nice to have you here tonight. I appreciate it. Happy New Year to you and your family. Election 2014 coverage, that's right. It's you can't answer the door because there might be a gubernatorial candidate there. Joe Avellone, a successful businessman from Wellesley, one of 5 Democrats are running for to succeed Deval Patrick. We kick off our election 2014 coverage. Of course, just finished up with a great mayoral race, and guess what? We've got a great gubernatorial race right around the corner coming up this fall, and lots of candidates. And tonight, joining me, one of the Democrats that's in this race. He's a successful businessman, a medical doctor who went into the business world, and now seeking to become the next governor of the Commonwealth. Of course, Governor Deval Patrick announcing that he will not run for re-election. From Wellesley, Joe Avellone. And Joe, nice to have you here.
So great to be here. Thanks,
Thanks
Joe.
so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, so new. Of course, there are some fairly well-known names in the race, but this wouldn't be the first time that a political unknown has come on to become governor. Of course, Governor DePatrick kind of breaking the mold, I think. What makes a guy like you think that? What would lead you to believe that you could be elected governor?
Well, first of all, I think you're right that we have elected outsiders into the governor's office in Massachusetts. Not every time, but a significant number of times. Certainly DePatrick was our latest example, and he has had a very good run in the governor's office. But before that, we've had other outsiders. Mitt Romney was, Governor Weld was. And if you even keep going farther back, Governor Dukakis, when he first ran, was not the insider. He really went around the state and created his own grassroots organization as a young reformer. So we have a history of doing that, and I believe that it gives us a richer government to do that. And obviously, I believe in the idea of being a citizen politician. I think what I've learned in my 30 years of career in the private sector, I think can be very important for what the next governor faces, and that's why I think I can make a difference, and that's why I'm running.
Who have you kind of, and you talked about a lot of those names of the past, but who do you model yourself off after, or are you totally unique?
No, actually, my political hero, if you will, or mentor was Senator Paul Tsongas, which many people certainly remember, and I really miss the fact that he's not with us. He was a great senator, a great statesman. But what I liked about him was that he was very pragmatic. He really looked for solutions versus ideology. He certainly worked with both sides of the aisle, but he solved problems. And that's the kind of Democrat I would like to be. And in fact, I was his healthcare advisor for his 1992 presidential campaign, and I was very proud to have done that.
Well, of course, healthcare is on everybody's mind. We've had the health connector here for some time, so it's not quite so traumatic yet. The stories from across the country with the advent of Obamacare, for lack of a better term, and it is raising a lot of issues and a lot of kind of concerns. And if you're the next governor, how would you deal with that? Is it more of the same, or is you obviously work in the industry? You probably know it better than anybody. What would you change?
Well, we have universal access, universal insurance here in Massachusetts. We've had it for 7 years, and it's a system that works. 97+% of all of our citizens are enrolled with insurance, and that's a very important thing. And we are really the first state to have done that. And a lot of what the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is trying to do is to implement that kind of thing in other states. But we already have a system that works. What we need to do now is keep it affordable. And that was always meant to be the second stage. The first was to get everybody insured, and then the second is to make sure that we work with our healthcare delivery system in order to keep it affordable for people. I was the chief operating officer of Blue Cross and Blue Shield back in the 1990s. In the 1990s, we controlled our healthcare costs at Blue Cross. And we also put in place a lot of new preventive medicine programs that have stood the test of time. But that's what the next governor is going to have to do. We are going to have to work with all of our major institutions in the state and change the way healthcare is delivered in a way that keeps it affordable. And I know that I can do that. I do think the next the next governor has got to do this. And I believe that my background will make me able to do it.
Well, part of what's going on, of course, and there's a lot of pressures on healthcare costs, but is almost this two-tiered systems, these kind of elite hospitals, the Partners Healthcare, the Mass General Brigham's partnership, and there's others as well, a lot of them Harvard teaching hospitals, kind of setting up this system where if you want the best care or you want the, I don't know if it's care, I should say, but certainly service, there's one level versus kind of community hospitals, and is that kind of undercutting our healthcare system?
Well, I think first of all, we have some world-class hospitals in Boston. We're very blessed for that, and they have an important role in research and in teaching. But and it is appropriate to have some of these very sophisticated hospitals versus community hospitals. Not every community hospital has to have all the services that are rarely performed on the most complicated cases. So the system really works best when patients are cared for in the appropriate facility for what is being done. So if it's a simple operation, say it's a simple appendectomy, that doesn't have to be done in a world-class teaching hospital. That certainly should be done in community hospitals. So as our healthcare systems form, as hospitals come together, I think it's important to make sure that they get organized in a way that the care is done in the appropriate setting. So we don't increase the costs in community hospitals just because they're now part of a larger system. The key to all of this is to having the care more coordinated and having doctors work in teams more than they do. Our system, as it grew up, has been very fragmented. Individual doctors making individual decisions, and we've all, I think, experienced what that means for our care. I don't know if you've had the experience, but many people have a loved one, say, that was seen by Dr. A, but then referred to Dr. B, maybe on to Dr. C. The tests don't follow. They often get repeated. Dr. C maybe never even heard what Dr. A had to say. That's very, very inefficient. And more organized care systems have the doctors work in teams so that the information flow is complete. That's much more efficient. And so the two ways to control our costs are to create what are called coordinated care systems with the doctors working more in teams and changing the way they're paid away from fee-for-service, which pays them for every single procedure or every visit and therefore for quantity, and pay them more on the basis of quality, good outcomes for how their patients work. So if we can get coordinated care systems and move away from fee-for-service, that creates these organized systems that will be much more affordable for the long term and actually have better outcomes for our patients as well.
Well, of course, the Patrick administration launched their own cost containment. I don't know if that's the right word, but wanting to take somewhat of a holistic approach,
Yes.
for lack of a better term as well. Is that working? Well, would you stick with that, or would you change it?
I think that was a good first step. So that was what's called Chapter 224.
Right.
That's our Affordable Care Act in Massachusetts. That set up a framework that allows us to do the things I was just talking about. But it's going to take a lot of political leadership from the next governor who understands the system, who's worked with all of these healthcare institutions like I have, in order to actually move down the road to changing the behavior and moving into these more organized systems. The first step was collecting a lot of data, and that's what has been going on for the last year or two since that law has been passed. And they've just published the first report from the so-called Health Policy Commission, which shows for the first time in our state across all the care that we may have as much as $29 billion in care that isn't creating better value. So inefficient care, the same inefficiency that I've just been talking about. That's tremendous amount of wastage. And if we can create more coordinated care systems and bring that down, it saves everybody a lot of money. So in the state budget itself, healthcare is now 40% of the state budget. That's huge, and that is cutting out our ability to invest in things like education and workforce development, transportation, things that the state really does have to invest in order for us to grow our economy and create the middle-class jobs that we need here. So controlling our health costs is absolutely critical for the next governor, just for the own state budget. It's also true that it's the biggest problem for cities and towns, and it helps control their budgets as well.
Do you think a lot of that gets lost in all the kind of hoopla over but politics becomes in many ways like a horse race,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like who's ahead and who's yet that kind of those kinds of decisions, those kinds of numbers. I mean, I'm not saying it's 40% of 29 billion, but let's say you could wring a couple of $1 billion out of that.
Well, absolutely.
Pretty
So,
dramatic.
yeah.
Does that get lost? And how do you make that sale to
How
the
do you make that
voters?
stick?
To really kind of understand how important
Well,
decisions like that are.
What I've found is that there's the next governor's got two tasks. One is to create thousands of new jobs throughout our state. Lots of our older cities and towns have 10% plus unemployment still. They're not recovering very well with our overall recovery. And those new jobs have to come from new businesses. In my case, I've actually run a large global business, and I know what we need to do to create the work skills in our education systems to bring those jobs. But the second thing then is to control our healthcare costs. And here's the numbers to remember. We have a $36 billion state budget. 40% of it's healthcare. If it was 39%, that's about another $150 million that could be used for education and some of the things that we know we have to invest in. So these numbers are very large just in the state budget itself, let alone how businesses and families deal with high healthcare costs. We have the highest healthcare costs in the world. So the next governor definitely has to deal with it, not only for our government, but for our private sector.
And how do you make that sale to people? Are they listening? You know, this is a long haul, a tough slog, so to speak. And you know, while you've been wildly successful in your own career, you're not a household name.
That's true.
How do you kind of break through? How does Joe Avellone kind of make that breakthrough?
I think I need to keep emphasizing that the next governor's got two big tasks. The first is to create jobs, and I've done that running a global business, and I know what we need to do to create the work skills here using our education system, and control our healthcare costs in order to make room for the investments we need to make. I think that starts to get through, but I agree with you. I'm coming from the outside, so I definitely have built a grassroots organization. I've been in 129 cities and towns. And as we go into the caucuses, I know I'm going to do very well in the caucuses because of all that shoe leather, that I've really been out there for a year.
Now you got to get 15% of the vote on one ballot at the Democratic Convention in June in order to make the primary ballot.
Yes, that's right.
Will you get there? How are you positioned?
I'm very confident we'll get there. And I've really found a lot of appeal in the cities. So, you know, cities like Boston, many of the neighborhoods in Boston, also I would say Worcester, Quincy, Taunton, Brockton, just to name a few where I know we've got very good support. So I think people in the cities in particular are understanding my message about jobs and improving our education to get the jobs and needing to control healthcare costs in order to make that work.
Now, I hate to tell you this, Joe, but you know that isn't so much some of those hot button, you know, kind of liberal issues that kind of inflame the masses. Talking about that, of course, you know, I think Deval Patrick, you know, he had his own style, but help us to kind of understand, help us put in perspective how you are compared to Deval Patrick. How are you different? How are you the same for those voters that liked him or those that are looking for something different?
Well, first of all, I think he created a wonderful vision for our state. And I think we don't need a different vision. I think he created a vision that we should continue to try and build on. He had a terrible recession. I mean, we can't underestimate how difficult this recession has been all throughout our state. So even with that, he's made some good progress on some significant things. Certainly, I think education, even though we have more to do. So the way I view it is that I want to keep the same vision for our state, but take on the next series of challenges that we would face in order to realize that vision. So in education, it's closing the achievement gap. We've made good progress on our public schools, but the achievement gap is too large. The underperforming schools still have thousands of kids across our state every year either dropping out or if they're even graduating not able to hold a job that would support a family. We've got to do better than that. We're really failing these kids. So the next big challenge for education is closing the achievement gap. The next big challenge for our jobs is to create the skills in our community and state colleges, vocational skills, and use those institutions much more proactively to understand those skills, and then I know we can bring businesses here. That's been my experience around the world. And the next thing in healthcare is, now that everybody's insured, is to keep it affordable. So I think I follow on his vision by tackling the next big problems. And I've been a manager of large organizations all my career, between Blue Cross and now PowerXL's core business. And I know that I can bring that kind of expertise to our government and take on those next big challenges, keep the vision.
Well, let's talk about ed reform, because that's a big issue here in the city. As a matter of fact, it in many ways drove the mayoral race. Didn't drive John Connolly to victory, but he had great strength based on his willingness to kind of tackle, some people would say dismantle the bureaucracy, the school department bureaucracy, but certainly make great changes. And of course, Mayor Marty Walsh has promised to make great changes as well. What does Joe Avellone do? Do you support the current system?
Well, I think, first of all, education is so vitally important to all the lives of our children and to our future as a Commonwealth. So I have a plan that I have put on my website, and it focuses on two critical goals. The first is closing the achievement gap, and the second is to make sure that everybody is career and/or college ready. In the case of the achievement gap, I'm going to focus on it like a laser. It is going to be my highest priority. I am going to fund it as a special fund in our budget. I'm not going to raise taxes to do it because I'm going to control healthcare costs, which will create the ability to do it. And it's going to invest in in those schools that are not performing in pre-K, lengthening school day, and an innovation fund that allows us to spend dollars in those schools where we know we have special issues. It may be multiple languages, it may be, and we know those things work. And they work in a big way. If someone starts in pre-K, is literate at the third grade, they have a much, much higher chance of finishing high school or even going on beyond that. So we know that works, and we know lengthening the school day works. So I think the state has to take an active role in those systems, in those schools which are not performing, and provide the things that we know work, like those things. For the rest of the school system generally, which are performing very well, I think we want to make sure that those school systems make everybody college or career ready. And I think the important things there are vocational education. I think we need to bring more vocational education back into the traditional curriculum of the schools.
You used to have it.
We did, we absolutely, and we got away from it. And I think that's to our detriment. You know, we have these regional vocational schools, and we do have some voc ed training in the schools, but not near enough. A lot of people can have good middle-class jobs without having to go on to higher education, and that, you know, is not the way we've been thinking about it lately. But those so-called jobs that are based on science or technology, engineering, and math, the so-called STEM jobs, half of those don't require anything beyond a good vocational school education, and those are $68,000 a year middle-class jobs on average, compared to about $40,000 otherwise. So I think we have an obligation to make sure we have updated vocational education, and we need to continue to use STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in our curriculums at lower levels for girls as well as underrepresented minorities.
Well, you know, some of this, of course, there's been a lot of great ideas in the past, and especially underperforming schools making some pretty dramatic changes. Those haven't gone over so well with teachers' unions sometimes, and these are the very people that will be at the convention,
yes,
deciding whether you get 15% of the vote, Joe, and deciding whether you're the Democratic nominee. You ready to take those folks on? You ready to bump heads with the, you know, some of the powers that be in the Democratic Party? Unions have a great deal of influence and power in the Democratic Party.
They do. Well, with regard to teachers, I think teachers are everyday heroes. So everything that I want to do is to support teachers. It's not to be an adversarial thing. It's not to blame them for our schools. I think we know that it's complicated reasons why the schools that don't perform. All I want to do is provide the resources to make sure that they get better. So I think I'm an ally of the teachers, and I think teachers, especially in those schools, would appreciate the extra funding and attention that we want to give them as a state. I have talked to, I've vetted my plan with union leaders, and I think have taken in their input, and I think so far it's been very well received. I would say about unions generally that—
Charter schools, there's support expanding charter schools?
Well, I think charter schools have a role, but the role is to be innovation centers for public school systems. To me, the bedrock for us is the public school system. That's what we, as a society and as a government, need to support. So long as they're innovation centers in which the learnings can be transferred to the rest of the school district, then I think they have a role. So what that means to me is they have to have the same population. So they have to have the same kind of students. They can't have students that are either have parents that are more interested or only the elite students. They have to have the students that are the same as the rest of the school system. Otherwise, we can't transfer the learnings. So I think there is a role, but the role is to support learnings for the public school system generally, not to create a separate school system or a new school system outside of the public school system or that escapes from it.
Now, what do you see, and again, for our viewers, if you're just joining us, Joe Avellone is a Democratic candidate for governor, a successful businessman from Wellesley. You still live in Wellesley,
I
right?
do, yeah. Our kids went all through the public schools there, and certainly we benefited from that.
How do you see your path to the nomination? What is it that leads you there? Obviously, there's some better-known candidates in the race, but how does a guy like you get there?
Well, let's remember that people have gotten there from the outside, so it can be done. And I started early. I started a year ago. I've been in 129 cities and towns and over 400 events, and certainly that is a big part of it. That's why I know I'm going to do well through the caucuses. And where I've really found traction is in solid middle-class Democratic cities. So, as I said, Worcester, Quincy, along the South Shore, parts of the North Shore, pretty significant areas.
How will you do in Boston?
I think I'll do well. I think I'll do well in Hyde Park, Rosendale, West Roxbury, part of Charlestown, part of Southie. And I've spent a lot of time in the inner city as well over the summer. Went on 5 of those Enough is Enough rallies this summer with Tito Jackson, walked those neighborhoods, saw the paralysis and the fear of the youth violence that's erupted there, and it's tragic. So I think I've got a very good grounding there as well. So I think I'm the candidate for the cities. I really think this is our focus. I think we need to bring back the cities, and my ability to create new jobs, having done it in the private sector and now bringing the idea of how to bring the new skills and controlling healthcare costs to do it is a powerful message. I think I'm the only candidate that has the ability to do both of those things, has done it in Massachusetts, and that is the message I want to take into the convention.
Well, this will come as no shock to you. There's some people that think, well, after 8 years of Deval Patrick, it may not matter who the Democratic nominee is, that some people are looking perhaps to go back to a Republican administration. Charlie Baker, who's also a successful healthcare professional, executive, also in the running.
Well, I can tell you.
Can the Democrats compete this year, or are they? There is some blowback to the administration of Deval Patrick, and how do you see yourself in that context?
You know what? This is. I think I am the candidate that can beat Charlie Baker. I think that a moderate.
You're very similar in some ways. You know?
We are. He's taller than I am, but I'm in the right party. So I've been a lifelong Democrat. I think someone that is a little more pragmatic Democrat like me and is focused on the right things, which I've been all over the state and I know is jobs and education, has a much better chance of beating Charlie Baker than some of the more progressive, maybe more progressive candidates. I can tell you this, if Charlie does get elected, we're going to take 2 steps backwards, because if he is going to run on anything like the ideas that he ran on last time, this is not at all where we should be going. There is a role for government. The role for government is to create opportunity, and the opportunity, in my mind, is often through the education system, but it's a proactive role. I don't think we're going to get that in a Republican administration or a Baker administration. But I think we do get it from me, and I think I am the pragmatic Democrat that matches up better with him.
Well, Joe, I want to wish you best of luck. I want to thank you so much for coming in tonight. Again, Joe Avellone from Wellesley, a former selectman, a medical doctor who went into the business and management side of healthcare, a former COO. Blue Cross, and now
Par-Excel International.
Par-Excel, and hoping to be the next governor of the Commonwealth. Of course, Deval Patrick announcing he will not run for re-election. Joe is one of 5 candidates in the race on the Democratic side. More on the other side, perhaps some independents as well. I want to wish you the best of luck. I really do. I enjoyed having you here.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
No problem. On upcoming editions of Talk to the Neighborhoods, we'll be meeting some of the other candidates as well. You're watching Talk to the Neighborhoods. We're here tonight and every Monday night at the same time. Until next week, I want to thank you for joining us. Have a pleasant evening.